And tonight we are going to be welcoming Miss Debra Dudek. Debra is the head of Adult and Teen Services at the Fountaindale Public Library District in Bolingbrook, Illinois. She's an alumna of the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, Scotland, and is the author of World War I Research Guide, Tracing American Military and Non-Combat Ancestors. We're so excited to hear from her today and learn a little bit more about maybe things we didn't hear in our history classes about World War I. So help me in welcoming Debra.
Thank you, Laura. Hello, everyone. I thank you guys so much for being up for a change of plan. I know I was not your original speaker, but thank you guys so much for coming out anyway. It's a strange and unusual situation that World War I does not get a lot of love, and I can get into that in a little bit, but just a show of hands, how many people, like this was gonna be their plan regardless of the speaker? Just like a raise of hands. All right. Oh, well, okay. And I was gonna ask how many people were drawn here by the sheer power of my personality. And, oh, okay, a whole bunch of you, perfect. Sorry, this is great, we're gonna get along fine. So this is an audience participation program. I want you guys to laugh, I want you to whisper to your neighbor, I want you to pass notes, please no kissing in the back row, you know, that sort of thing. Let's keep it classy, there are other people here. But I want you guys to have a good time with this presentation because there are some heavy subjects that we're gonna hit on, but I want you all to feel like you've learned something, but at the same time haven't enjoyed learning this concept, because I want you guys to go out into the world and help maybe answer up some of those questions you get from younger people if there are any. So, what do you guys remember from your World War I history class? Now, you all are in, maybe this demographic skews a little older, which is great, because this is the knowledgeable generation, where you get somebody like me, who went to high school, and my World War I portion of our book was half a page. Which was super weird with that sergeant painting of all the men in the gas mask or all the men with the covered eyes. We got a half page. By the time the young man in the back who is like selfishly holding onto his cookie and won't share, by the time he gets to high school, it might get 2 sentences in his textbook. So let's go through this. I get invited quite a bit to come out to local high schools and talk about World War I. I think it gives the teachers some breathing room. They've got lesson plans and other things to do. But the other bit is because I've been researching World War I for the better part of 5 or 6 years now, genealogically and then otherwise for the books and articles that I write. I go into the classes and the first thing I ask the kids, what are the things that you know about World War I? And the top 3 are up here. So. They all say the assassination of Franz Ferdinand. They whether or not say it was the band or the Archduke. They won't say. The sinking of the Lusitania and the Treaty of the Versailles. And I get those out of the AP classes, okay? I typically don't get them out of the regular classes. But my favorite one are the honorable mentions. And Ernest Hemingway or F. Scott Fitzgerald. That's how you know we are still reading Great Gatsby and Farewell to Arms in school. So way to go us. The Wonder Woman movie, another one of my personal favorites. Hey, you know, Wonder Woman, that new Wonder Woman movie has done leaps and bounds for the Great War. I'm not gonna smack it. And, you know, it's also one of the better movies in the DC universe. So, you know, we'll throw it there. The flu pandemic, I get that a lot more with people with STEM because of science classes and we talk about diseases and such. The Red Baron, and Snoopy is the Red Baron, so I'm pleased the Peanuts are making a comeback. But my favorite one was what this kid scribbled. I don't make them ask their questions. I'm like, write them down, and then they have runners bring them down. And the one question I got, I'm like, he's either a smart aleck or he really is just trying to stick it to me, but he says, it happened before World War II. Yes, it did. And that's the quality of education that I'm working with. But all of these are you guys can laugh all you want to, and I'm laughing too. But this is what has been kind of passed down. The story of World War I has been slightly hidden because of trauma. Trauma is a big one. And then later we had another war that was a little bit easier to rally behind. Because World War I is a lost war because people really, even when they were there, really didn't know what they were fighting for. We're fighting for democracy. We're fighting, this is gonna be the war to end all wars. We're going to fight to bring democracy to other areas, that we don't want kingdoms and regimes and all of this other stuff. But when you stop and think about it, people really didn't have a clear reason why. And so when you kind of spent some time fighting and seeing people die and what you felt may have not been an exactly real or concrete reason, it's hard to then go out and talk about that war. It's easy to talk about how we all, we got bombed by the Japanese and we went and we kicked Nazis in the balls, right, in New York. We love that story. That's a great American story. What do we like? We like the American Revolution. What'd we do? Class, in the American Revolution, we can get behind that. Why? Taxation bad, king bad, we're gonna fight for our freedom, right? Everybody loves that story. That's a great story. What's another one? Civil War. I'm in the North, so I'm gonna have to watch what I say, all right? It's like slavery bad, freedom good, North wins, slaves are free, yay, America, right? We love that story. That's a great narrative. And World War II is great because it's Nazis bad, America good. Like, we're gonna go and fight the Nazis. People love those stories. What about World War I? What about the Spanish-American War? What about the Philippine War? What about the Indian Wars? What about the Mexican War? We don't talk about these wars. So tonight we're gonna spend a little bit of time talking about World War I, so that it truly was a world war. This is the whole bit, that we had over 100 countries and men and women from all over the world who are fighting in this conflict. So I happen to have this really great photo of the British, the Russians, the Americans, everybody going down the line. But surprisingly, Japan is the one that people really don't pay attention to with World War I, because incidentally, World War I, the Japanese were kind of called up the British and said, hey, we've noticed there's all these German colonies out here in the Pacific. Do you want us to take care of that for you? And the UK are like, tip, tip, cheerio, pip, pip, that sounds great. And yeah, go clean that up for us. And they did. And when they finished, because they're kind of running errands for the British, the Japanese got to come to the big kids table at Versailles, and they were granted all of that territory that they had taken from the Germany in the First World War. So then what happens? This is a perfect setup for World War II. So these things are interconnected. I love this. The other one I love is that I'm a big fan of the Australian Camel Corps, which is over here. This is a show that needs to be on Netflix. And anybody does research on the Camel Corps, the Australian Camel Corps, because they're in the Middle East. They're like, we talk about the Western Front, but we don't talk about the Middle Eastern Front. We don't talk about the African Front. We don't talk about the Russian Front. We don't talk about the Russian Front that's close to Alaska Front. We don't talk about some of these other places, or the Pacific where the Germans have colonies. We tend to stay a lot of time in the Western Front. But this is a show with the Camel Corps that need to star Russell Crowe, Hugh Jackman, whoever else is Australian needs to be in that show, and there need to be live camels, no CGI. Because these guys are out in the desert when they realized their horses were dying like crazy because there's no water in the desert. They called their superiors and said, hey, we really need something that won't die in the desert. We want to adopt these camels. And the British High Commander, like, camels? What are you talking about, camels? We've never used camels. That's outrageous. That's ludicrous. We don't even know how to handle camels. They're like, well, we don't either, but they don't die in the desert. If I did a good Australian accent, it would come off funnier. But if you can imagine Russell Crowe saying that, it's pretty great, isn't it? Which is why we need to have a Camel Corps series on Netflix. But if anybody watched the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles at all right, the documentary, I'm looking at Dad back there, the documentary portion of the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles is fabulous, and it's filled with a lot of World War I stuff if you're interested. So go back and watch those. How about Rise of the Machines? And I don't mean that Terminator way, even though it feels like it, doesn't it? Does anybody look at their Amazon Alexa and say Skynet's coming for them? The Terminator's coming for them. I feel that every single time. Like, I only have one in one room because I don't like her listening to me. It's good. I see that little ring thinking, I'm like, oh man, it's coming. It really freaks me out. But for the Great War, it was a rise of the machine. It was a technical age. We start getting things like the Liberty truck. Here, Cantigny, you guys have one of these trucks. They gave it away a ride, not the truck, but they gave away a ride in the truck at one of their trivia contests. I got hosed because a bunch of my teammates were absolutely helpless at trivia. So we lost our chance to get a ride in a Liberty truck, which would have been amazing. But we helped perfect that during our little war with Pancho Villa, 1916. Anybody? Another one we don't really talk about? Oh yeah, Pancho Villa. We had to thank him for making us kind of come to terms with the fact that we don't have to feed, water, and shoot cars and trucks that we can, just kind of roll those out, and what to do and how to rebuild a chassis for any sort of all-weather utility, which we have to get. Thank you, Pancho Villa. So we also had, but what I love the most is this great, innovative armored car. We think of armored cars as gangster things, don't we? Al Capone must have had an armored car. Oh, no. The British got there first. I like it the best because it has a gun turret at the top. We also had, whoa, I didn't do that. What happened? I'm skipping over half my story, sorry. So, we also had motorcycles, sidecars. We had tanks and tractors. Tractors are a big one, because tractors were the types of things that we started using on the farms to cut down on animal labor, and Europe started taking over that too, that the horses and stuff all went to the front, so we've got to have tractors to help take over agriculture. But they were also exceptionally good for getting equipment out of the mud. And these tractors slowly started coming onto the scene. And then tanks were great, because for a little while after the Great War, they used tanks as public transportation in London. That, I don't want to see the fare, I don't want to see the ticket price on that experience. It would have been terribly uncomfortable, and I think it's not very good for the road, especially if you see how small the London streets are. It's also a wireless age. We talk about wireless like we live in a Wi-Fi age. There was a Wi-Fi revolution at the beginning of the Great War, because what did we have on giant ships, most notably one that went down in the North Atlantic, and it made a movie that was like $11 jillion at the box office? Titanic, right. So they had what did they have on board? Any Titanic nerds? A Marconi wireless set, that's correct. So it was the must-have, if you think about it, voice activation upgrade that you had on today's cars. That's what you had on ships. And taking the fact that they had the experiences like the Titanic, Marconi was able to swoop in and say, hey, we've got these wireless devices that allow you to transmit information over long distances very, very instantaneously. Hey, would you like a contract with us? And before you know it, it was being utilized. So there's quite a bit, and the British used this. They were kind of slow to use it, but they used it in the West African and the Middle Eastern campaigns, and I got that from the Camel Corps as well, that they would have to wait for some sort of response, because there just was no messenger, no pigeon, no ship that was fast enough to get them their orders. A lot of it, what they were getting were over the wireless. So you're waiting for that. So plastic surgery comes out of the Great War. We don't think about this. I'm a big fan of a show called Peaky Blinders, but there's another one. It was the Prohibition one. Oh, mercy, that's going to bother me. Boardwalk Empire. And in it, there's one of the characters who has half a face that's missing, so he has a replacement face that's there. Though that was actually, a lot of those were styled by an American woman who'd studied in Paris, and she had sculpted. She was a sculptor by trade, but she would come in and would sculpt the man's face so it looked very natural, and they would use certain features of the face to stick the replacement face on, and then put things like glasses over on top of that face covering so it looked natural and it would stay in place over long periods of time. But plastic surgery was one of the things that we were able, for people who could get that surgery and were able to get that surgery, it worked remarkably well. Now there's several frames before this, but since we're having cookies and wine and coffee, I don't want that to leave a bad taste in your mouth. So we just went with what I felt would probably work out tonight, okay? And but as you can see, using replacement pieces of different skin from different parts of the body, by the time our British veteran gets to the end of his life, he looks just as if he'd never been in war at all, which is really amazing. This is service dogs. Now, Laura is quite fond of the 1st Division mascot, Rags, which she was then telling me this story and about what I don't want to make everybody cry, but if you read that book, she just says, and then they went home and they all lived happily ever after, and that's totally what you should use, okay? Just unless you're that person. I've always been a big supporter of Sergeant Stubby, because that's what I grew up with as a kid. My grandma talked about Sergeant Stubby. He just had a movie. Well, he personally didn't have a movie come out. It's not like he starred in it. That'd be like super weird. But there was a cartoon animated version of his life as a service dog. Super cute. We showed it at the library. Kids love it. It's great. And then again, Jeremy the pigeon. And I have to put animals on this and not just dogs. So Jeremy the pigeon, does everybody know the story of Jeremy the pigeon? I'm seeing a lot of no's. All right, this is fun. So check this out. So Jeremy the pigeon, there were over 10, I think there were like over 10,000 pigeons that were used as messenger pigeons. And this isn't new. We've used messenger pigeons in war through time. This is not a new concept. But they were actually so precious in the United Kingdom that if you were caught abusing or killing a pigeon, it came with a fine and a prison sentence. I mean, this was the ante was up there because these carrier pigeons were needed for the war effort. But in the States, Jeremy the pigeon was one of 2 pigeons who were with a group of men who were pinned down, American men who were pinned down behind enemy lines, and they were getting friendly fire from one side, and they're getting German fire from another, and they had gone from 500 to like 152. And Jeremy the pigeon, they needed to say, please stop firing at us. We're friendlies. Stop firing from this direction. The Germans are coming from this direction. And they shot the first pigeon down. So that pigeon's down for the count. So Jeremy takes off with her little canister on her leg. She goes off. She gets shot twice. Bam, bam, in the breast. And still, like, recovers and keeps flying. Makes it to the line that she needs to get to, delivers her message, and the medics actually start to try to save her life. She was shot twice, bam, bam. She lost an eye and one of her legs. And she made it through. And because of her message, it saved the life of the 152 men. But what was more importantly is that she became a symbol for endurance in the war, especially this plucky little pigeon where, no offense, and you know, most people are not as hardcore as this pigeon. Like, let's be real, I am not one of those people. Yeah, but she was. And she actually got a little like wooden carved leg as a replacement. You know, that's we got to look after her. Leave no pigeon behind, you know. So let's make that happen. But there's also other types of dogs. Those are the 3 most well-known, but there's others. There's my personal favorite. There's Mutt, the YMCA cigarette dog. So the YMCA, of course, they would collect money, and then from everyday people. There's a popular poster you'll see called "Our Boys Need Smokes." So people would give up money, and you see this from Canada as well. So people would send money off for cigarettes for the soldiers, and the YMCA had this really great idea of, instead of sending a person who could be shot, let's send a little French bulldog terrier out into the trenches and deliver cigarettes. So normally animals could be abandoned by the military when they got out of, when they were done with service. So there were stray dogs, stray animals all through Europe after the Great War. But Mutt actually made it home. He got smuggled in underneath a sergeant's coat, and someone brought him home. A filly is another one. Now she's I would say a lady dog. She's a female dog. She was a little mutt dog that they found. The 315th Infantry was out of Philadelphia. And so they were the Philly boys. And they found her as this little puppy, and they got attached to her, and the sergeant smuggled her in his coat on the ship over to Europe, thinking, oh, she's gonna be a mascot dog, this is gonna be great. She gets there and becomes one of their most valuable guard dogs of their unit, to the point that she was so in tune with gas attacks, with movements, with what Germans looked like, what they smelled like, everything. She had a 50 Deutschmark bounty on her head. Now, and this is the best thing, she's also, from my understanding, the only documented dog to have given birth in the trenches during the Great War. So she had 4 puppies, all of which were adopted right away. And when she came home, they would leave the dogs, but she got smuggled back in, and a couple of her puppies did too. And they brought them all home, and she lived a long and happy life in Philadelphia. She used to come to all of the reunions for the group, and she got fed her favorite food, which was liver pate, if I remember directly. And when she died, her owner didn't have the money to have her taxidermied like Sergeant Stubby, so he buried her under his driveway. But then the rest of the unit found out and said, oh no, we're not leaving our filly behind. So they exhumed her and had her taxidermied, and now she's at a museum in Philadelphia. So she's a great little dog, a great little story. And I think the thing that I get the most out of these stories, which I love, is how we kind of think animals are like a new concept in war, but they're not, and especially service dogs. I love going through and looking at some of the other service dogs that they have. So on this well, I think there was another photo that somebody had sent me of one of the London zoos using elephants to drag heavy artillery through London, which was kind of cool. It's a war effort, right? We're going to use those big elephants to haul stuff. That kind of makes sense. Now, with Sergeant Stubby, with Share Me, with Rags, with all of the other animals that we have, there are various animal monuments around the United States, so if you ever get a chance to see them, I do encourage you to do so. But I also remember that the next time you see a service animal, they have organizations that have former service dogs that are up for adoption. If you're looking for a new family friend or a new family pet, you might want to consult those, because those are some hardworking dogs who could use a good home and a good retirement. So, and don't forget to have them spayed and neutered and, whatever Bob Barker told us, okay? So London's Great War, Zeppelin terror. So this is another thing that always surprises people, are how Blitz attacks did not take place just during World War II. They actually happened by Zeppelin during the First World War. We don't hear about this very often because the UK government tried really hard to clamp down on knowledge of these Zeppelin attacks. But they were an exceptionally scary experiment, and they were not only for the people who are flying the Zeppelins, but for the people on the ground. So it wasn't a sustainable type of warfare, because Zeppelins are they fast or are they slow, kids? They're slow, right? And even though we're doing this at night, by the time that they had knowledge of these types of Zeppelin attacks, it was pretty easy for you to just go up there with a couple of fighters and just take them down. This was not sustainable, so it was canceled. But it's still one of the fascinating facts that had that been something that other types of airfare hadn't been ready to go, it could have been a real threat to Great Britain. So who knows this guy? All right, this is the Red Baron, right? He also had a brother. You know that, right? And the brother was also very, very famous. Did you know his brother was taken down by a guy from Illinois? Yeah, that's right. He was, his name was Field, Eugene Field. Field Eugene. He has like one of those names where you're like, the parents must have been on some sort of high drug when they named him. It was like Field Eugene or Eugene Field. It was something along those lines. But he graduated from the University of Illinois, which is really, really cool. But he took down the Red Baron's brother, so here's the Red Baron up here today. Now, again, this is where I have to say thank you, Snoopy, for making part of the Great War possible, because the Red Baron wasn't taken down by any one individual person. At the time that he was shot down, it was credited to a Canadian named Roy Brown, who was with an infantry unit out of Ontario. He's from a small town called Carleton Place, Ontario, which is about 30 minutes outside of Ottawa. But he was credited with shooting down the Red Baron. But there were multiple barrages. Nobody quite knows how he was shot down. But he personified a lot of what we tend to think of as the World War flying ace. World War I flying aces were the rock stars, the Bruce Springsteens, the Keith Richards, the Mick Jagger of their time period, and it kind of diminishes from the technological aspects of warfare, that there were over 50 types of planes that were used, not just planes that were used for warfare or for one-on-one dogfighting combat, but ones that were used for reconnaissance, ones that were used for bombings. And then I always love to talk about how do we perfect the fact that we're shooting through propellers. The Germans came up with the synchronized version of synchronized guns up in an airplane, so you could be flying solo. You don't want to blow off your own propeller with bullets. That's super helpful. The propeller, you need the propeller to stay in the air. That's a history spoiler. I didn't know if you knew that, but you need the propeller. It's super useful. So they were able to perfect that point, and once they did, they made it very, very easy to make further advances in that warfare. Now, I particularly care for the reconnaissance pilots because those guys had a hard time, but also the balloonists and the observation. So the Zeppelin people who were involved in the reconnaissance in Zeppelins, and then the people who were in the balloon units. So we don't necessarily talk about them, but balloon units before or at World War I, kids? Before, thank you. I knew this was the class that we were going to be in. Fantastic. Do you get that, kid? Balloons before, not at or after, okay? He's learning just as much as, like, nobody else is learning in this class. He's the only one learning tonight. All right. Women in the military. So I'm not going to talk about Wonder Woman yet. Right, I promise I'm not. I did want to talk a little bit about the women who served in the military. These are the ladies of the U.S. Signal Corps, U.S. American Signal Corps. They have an amazing story in themselves. Further in my reading materials, there's a great documentary about them called The Hello Girls. So over 2,000, I believe it's 4,000 women applied to work in the U.S. Signal Corps as telephone operators. Because women were considered more polite than men. That's super helpful. And they needed to be fluent in both French and English and to be able to translate in real time. So they put out the call, we need these women who can do this, and be able to operate telephone machinery and switchboard machinery. So they whittled it down to like less than 300, around 300. And they were shipped off to the front. And at first, with lines and cables, they're trying to keep them away from harm's way because we want to make sure we don't kill these women. You know, their place is not at the front, right? You know, their place is near. But because of technology and because of movement, they were eventually placed near the front lines. And so they would have gas attack. They would stop doing their switchboard. They would put their gas mask on, wait for the gas to clear, take the mask off, go back to work. And they're translating in French into English and from English into French in real time, where they're talking to the officers. You have one officer here, and you are the conduit in which communication is being made. You are that bridge. So these women did astounding work, amazing work. And when the war was over, and they had commendations everywhere. People are like, they were amazing. They were professional. They were everything we needed in soldiers. They were fantastic. And when they left, the U.S. government said, well, the Army says only men can be in the Army. And because you're women, you're not going to get an honorable discharge. And we're not going to pay your medical expenses. And you're not going to get any pensions, you're not going to get any benefits, you just need to kind of go away now. You've done your thing, go make babies. And they did not take this kindly. So they rallied and they lobbied for years to get recognition. It wasn't until Jimmy Carter stepped in and actually gave the surviving Hello Girls recognition, gave them all honorable discharges, gave them their pensions, gave them all of the back benefits that they needed, and then signed the bill for them to be buried in Arlington Cemetery, if that was something that they wanted. So it took quite a bit of time for them to get the recognition that they deserved. Now, our lady veterans in the Navy and in the Marines and in the Coast Guard, they didn't have that problem because it said any able-bodied person, not any able-bodied man. So they were able to get their full veterans benefits. They were honorably discharged, they served as longshoremen, they served as reservists, so they did staggering amounts of work, and then they were recognized for their service as well. So, which gets me into, we're not gonna talk about Wonder Woman, but it's an intriguing concept, isn't it? When I go and I talk to classes, they'll say, well, Wonder Woman was great, and she's, kicking butt and everything, and like she's the only woman who did that, even though she's not real, she's just the only one who did that. No, not by a long shot. No, she's not. These are the fighting combat women of the Great War. Now, these are the only ones that I'm able to kind of show up. There are more, of course. They're not necessarily fighting as Americans. So this is the British, the Serbians, and the Russians. And my personal favorite are the Russian Women's Battalion of Death. Doesn't that sound like a metal band? Like, Battle of Death! Battle of Death! It seems to be that thing. But women were able to enlist, and they joined this Battalion of Death. Now, their matriarch, if you will, Maria, she was able to, she enlisted on her own reconnaissance. She got a special dispensation from the Tsar to join the army. And when she was out there kicking butt, taking names, not taking orders from anybody, and was actually leading men into battle, the new Russian provisional government said, she said, I want to lead women. There's no reason, if a man is going to go out and fight for his country, women should be able to fight for their country if they want to. And the Russian government said, well, we're having a really hard time keeping men. People are running away from the front. There's a lot of problems. Maybe if men see that women are fighting, they'll be like, oh crap, we can't be shown up by these women, we should go. And it worked beautifully until there were a couple of battles and they wiped out a slew of the women. But to be fair, they were also wiping out slews of men, so that didn't last very long. Flora Sanders, she actually started off as she's a British woman, she actually started off as an ambulance driver, she went in and enlisted in the Serbian army. Ladies, just letting you know, if you wanted to fight in World War I, join the Serbian army. They take women. We're just letting you know that right now. Just history spoiler. So, and next is Maluka Salvik. Now, she is she is actually the most highly decorated female veteran of the Great War, and some historians say the highest decorated female soldier ever. That she actually is the only one who's received a Croix de Guerre for actually military service, not service to the military, but military service. And she ended up being like a cleaning lady after the war. Like it was so random. She showed up for the Serbian celebration days in her old uniform with all of her medals, and people were like, "Oh crap, that's you? That's crazy. What are you doing now?" She's like, I clean houses. They're like, this is unacceptable. We're going to change that right now. So they gave her a pension. They gave her all the things that she should have kind of had. And she died a legend. I think she's on like postage stamps and stuff in Serbia, which is where she belongs. But there's also a lot of weird stories and legends about her, like how she was this amazing sharpshooter, but ultimately she was just a professional soldier, which I think she wasn't just fighting in World War I, she fought in the Balkan War as well, so she's a twofer. So when you think about women, combat women fighting, this is happening. It's just not happening for the United States at that time period. Because what are women doing here in the US? We're fighting for what, ladies? The vote. That's right. And World War I paved the way for women's suffrage. This is a great quote. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. But now that the war has come, Carrie Catt and a slew of other suffrage organizers said, because women are being asked to sacrifice their lives for war, the way that men are asked to sacrifice their lives for war, we are now free and equal citizens, and should be free and equal citizens. So if you're asking a woman to become a yeoman, if you're asking women to do this, oh yeah, we'll do it. But now that we're fighting and our lives are on the line, our lives, we should have the vote. And that's what she did. So here, the suffrage leaders, like Cherry Chapman Catt, when they wrote these editorials, and remember, women's suffrage newspapers don't look like women's magazines, all right? They don't. They're heavy stuff. There aren't like cute recipe columns or what shoes match with what fur. This is not what we're reading, ladies. We're reading hardcore stuff about what the duty is to the cause, how we're organizing, how we're going to harass this senator. But one of the things that Cherry Chapman Catt put out was she said, your country needs you. The cause needs you. Get out there and join the war effort. And over 5 million women did so. And that's initially. That's not counting the trickle that got peer pressured into it later because their friends were all doing it. You know, that's me. I'm the person who goes out there and is going to answer the call. My sister waits like 3 months. She's got to see how many of her friends are involved, you know, before she'll join in. It's not cool until it's cool by association. You know what I mean? So you know, she's joining. So women aren't just joining the military. They're joining the Red Cross. They're joining the Jewish Welfare Board. They're joining the Land Army. They're joining up with different service organizations. They're joining factories. They're making munitions. All of this is considered the war movement and the war effort. And because of that pressure of women coming in the service, and when they're coming out saying, I'm a veteran of this war, and I fought for my country, and I don't have the right to vote, how does that make sense? Next month, I'm giving a whole presentation, if you like this train that we're on. Next month, I'm giving a lecture down at the Illinois State Historical Society Winter Lecture Series, where we talk about suffrage, and service during the Great War. So if you love this, I've got even more, just not right now, okay? So, good times. Let's talk about International Donut Day. We didn't have donuts here, which is sad, but I'm a big fan of donuts. Where we get International Donut Day is actually consequence because of the First World War. So here's Stella Young. She was one of the Salvation Army donut lassies. There were more than just women from the Salvation Army. They're making more than just donuts. They're making very good pie and cakes and cookies and all sorts of lovely baked goods. They're taking care of that. If anybody's seen a menu of what men were eating during the Great War, has anybody seen a menu? I have, and there's one gentleman who's like, yes, what are you getting? You're getting beef, you're getting some sort of potato, you're getting some sort of bread, coffee, and maybe every once in a while you're getting some sort of bread pudding. It's basically bread, potatoes, and meat and coffee. That's the square meal. And they keep no chicken, very little pork, everything is meat-based. If you're a vegetarian or a vegan, you are totally out of luck. It's not happening. But that's what they're eating. So going to a Salvation Army station where this pretty girl, no offense, she's cute, I think she's cute, is making donuts and talking to you. And you're able to get free coffee and free donuts. And I did have somebody in an interview, World War I interview, said, I loved going to the Salvation Army because my donuts and my coffee were free. But if I went to the Red Cross, I had to pay 5 cents. So Salvation Army was like super popular. And because in 1938, there was a fundraiser for the Salvation Army, and they thought, oh, there's all these World War I guys and girls who remember the donut lassies. Let's do a fundraiser and use the donuts, and we'll use that as a fundraiser for our organization, and it worked out brilliantly. So over time now, the Salvation Army isn't quite on everyone's radar the way that like the Red Cross or Goodwill is, but it really should be back up there because of the amazing service that they gave. And we have them to thank for International Donut Day. So the next time you guys go out and buy that donut, think of your donut lassies, because they're out there with little tin hats on and making the dough and making sure guys have what they need before they go out into the front. So, blood banks. We don't talk about blood banks. This surprises a lot of people, especially my high school students, when we talk about blood banks. But blood banks were developed in the Great War by Americans. So that's an American innovation right there. They could be transferred person to person, but they did have a donation option here. And what I like about the donation options is they actually would have a cotton filter at the end of the blood bank, so it would take out any debris or any sort of unwanted materials from the donation, if you know what I mean. If you were a vampire, this was a great place to be. But in the case of the blood bank, and they didn't quite understand the whole blood type thing yet, so it really was a crapshoot for some people. Thankfully, there's more O's, right, because we're the universal donors. There are more O's of us in the world. So they didn't have, and they didn't really keep track of, they didn't really have a way to keep track of, is this O, is this A, is this B, whatever it was. So it was sort of up in the air, but it saved lives. And it was an innovation that we came up that's a pure American innovation that we started using during the Great War, and we don't talk about it nearly as much as we should. American food slogans. You guys weren't expecting this. Am I surprising anybody in this room by any of this? A couple people who are like, yeah. I saw 2 people leave, so I thought I must be that boring. So I thought I'd query the class real quick. Perfect. So American food slogans. You might hear the young kids say these days, oh, it's Meatless Monday, or it's Wheatless Wednesday. Taco Tuesday is not part of this. There was no Taco Tuesday, but there was Meatless Mondays and Wheatless Wednesdays, and those were invented by the U.S. Food Administration to conserve food. Now, if anybody is a cookbook fiend like I am, I love old cookbooks. I am that dork who goes through, and I see some husbands and wives are like, oh, yeah, that's that. I'm one of those people. I love old cookbooks. I love anything from before 1950. That tends to be like my jam. So I love going back into old cookbooks. They don't have pictures, so you're reading a lot of the instructions. But there are whole U.S. Food Administration cookbooks that have, these are the types of things you should be using: spelt, barley, molasses, honey. Don't use sugar, use these sweeteners. Don't use wheat, use sorghum, use barley, use spelt, use potato, use these things. And then we can ship that stuff over to Europe, because we're not feeding just our army, we're feeding our allies, and we're feeding the refugees that are there. So everything that we could do here to conserve food voluntarily, it was completely voluntary. But who was in charge of the U.S. Food Administration during that time? Anybody? Herbert Hoover, yeah. Why do you think he shot to fame? It's because of the relief work that his organizations did during the Great War. That's how he got to be president. It wasn't because he was a particularly good organizer. He was a good talker, absolutely, but there were a lot of private organizations that were kind of in charge of a lot of this stuff. But he went out there promoting. He was a great promoter. Wheatless Wednesdays, meatless Mondays, like we need to conserve food. And 13 million Americans agreed to this pledge that I'm going to lick the platter clean, that we're going to just have the food that's available and it's available in our pamphlet. And they went beautifully. I tried 2 or 3 recipes, and we would consider stuff that you would get from Whole Foods now, like spelt bread, right? Or potato bread, that's the fancy bread now. That was considered a sacrifice. Like, we're gonna do this. So if you love old magazine, or if you love these old recipes, you can get a lot of these cookbooks available online. They're for free, you can download them for free, or you can go onto Pinterest, and there's lots of people posting those old recipes on Pinterest. Now, I'm also a nerd for World War II ration cooking, because we take what happened in the Great War in Britain. It starved their country because they didn't have a ration system involved. It was completely voluntary until it got really bad. So around 1917, when it almost broke the country, like more than half of its population couldn't afford to buy food. By the time we get to World War II, Britain had learned its lesson and said, okay, we're going to start rationing before we actually need to ration. So we're going to start rationing meat, we're going to start rationing wheat, we're going to start rationing sweets. So they learned their lesson from the Great War because they did not ration. Wealthy families, middle-class families, they could afford to eat, but the poor classes, the government had to actually end up putting out communal canteens for everyday working people because they just couldn't afford food during the Great War. So when you see this, we actually got off pretty lucky. This was all voluntary, but we used the model that we got from Britain as well to start our own rationing. So if anybody's interested in rationing, come talk to me, because I'm that person who likes those recipes. All right, from neighbor to enemy. Enemy aliens. We don't talk about them so much right now, right? We don't talk about aliens, enemy aliens, people from other countries. At the time of the Great War, 1/4 of the people in the United States were foreign-born, or the children of foreign-born parents. And the moment America declared war in Europe in 1917, those individuals from the Austrian, who were still citizens of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, or from the German Empire, were considered enemy aliens. And they were asked to go down to their local police station and to register as enemy aliens. Now, some of these people were quite old. They were elderly. They'd been here since the 1880s. They had just never bothered to become naturalized. In the instance of the young man who's behind me, he had immigrated at the age of 2. So his parents had brought him to Minnesota when he was 2 years old. So he didn't think of himself as not being an American. He said, I grew up here, I'm an American. And the government said, no, you were born in Germany. You could turn on us at any time, go down to the police office and go get your fingerprinted, go get your picture taken, fill out your forms. This is a 4-page form. This is the type of stuff a genealogy nerd like me loves, because they ask for everything like your parents' names, where were you born, the number of children you've had, what year were they born, where were they born, where have you been the last 5 years, give me your exact address. I mean, it's the stuff, but the government collected that on every single citizen of the German Empire and Austrian-Hungarian Empire, every single one. And if you didn't, you got thrown in jail. The other thing we need to talk about too are internment camps. We had 2 of them here in the United States during the Great War. So we don't talk about them, but they happened. And a lot of them are people who refused to sign these forms and to fill these out. Now, I had a nice lady who told me, oh, my ancestor couldn't have had them because they were living on a farm in the middle of nowhere. No, your neighbors were pretty hyped up by the propaganda machine to report you if you hadn't been down to the police station. And they knew who you were. You're not just some rando person. It's a little harder in the cities, not so much out in the boonies. But they were required to fill this paperwork out. This is great because for genealogists, if these survive and these are your ancestors, you get what? You get a name, you get a nice photograph, you get all this beautiful genealogical data. But in a lot of places, the police departments were given leave in 1920 to destroy these records. But the ones for Cook County we've been trying to find because we were told they were not destroyed. They're probably in some Chicago storage unit somewhere with like Jimmy Hoffa and a bunch of Al Capone stuff, you know. I keep hoping one day we'll find them because we can find bits and pieces of like you actually got a receipt that had your name on it and your photograph and your thumbprint, and you were required to take that with you around at all times. That was your identification card, your enemy alien identification card. And some of those have survived to the present day. So if you get a chance to see some of these, they're stellar, they're great. And we're on the lookout for them. So if you see anything that looks like this and looks that weird and smells that great, let me know because we want to know where those are. So talking about aliens in the Army, there's another misconception about the Great War that if you joined the Army, you automatically became a citizen. Not so fast. It's not happening that way. I wouldn't say strongly pressured, gently invited, and then given that eyebrow, the types that parents love to give that you don't really have a choice, you know, like, you want to become an American, don't you? You know, that sort of look. It works fairly well. And if with the patrons that I've worked with who've had this story, they'll say, well, they became a citizen the moment they entered the military. That's not the point. The whole process of joining the military is that Americans did. These are a slew of people who may or not be from America. It was every American man. That's what your selective service says, guys, isn't it? Regardless if you're a citizen or not, you need to register for selective service. It was the same way for the draft of 1917, that every single man over the age of 21 had to register for the draft, regardless of your citizenship status. So they would fill out their draft card. Those are online, they're really great to see. But if you enlisted, the government kind of realized, like, oh crap, we have a slew of these men who are not Americans and we're asking them to put on a uniform and we could be shipping them off someplace and we're not sure if they're gonna turn on us. Better make sure they're Americans before they go. So they would get people up and say, okay, who wants to become an American? And a lot of people are like, yeah, this sounds great. Like, I'm into it. Like, I've been here since I was 5. This is great. I'm already American. I'll do your paperwork. And it streamlined the process. So instead of waiting 5 to 7 years to fill out a declaration of intent and then spending another 5 years to get your citizenship papers, they did it all in one day. They could fill out their paperwork. As you can see, these are the guys who are filling out their paperwork. They fill out their paperwork. Their commanding officer would typically sign as their witness. Then they would either go one by one or stand in line, and the judge would administer their oath. Great. And then when we're done, there might be a puppet show, there might be a movie, there might be something else, or we're just going back to camp to build more ditches. Like, this is fine. But they made sure they streamlined the process. And what's difficult for some people is they're like, I don't know when my ancestor naturalized because they were in the Army at the time that they naturalized. And these naturalizations were done sometimes in camps, sometimes that they were naturalized in the nearest town near camps, so it's hard to find out where that is. But it's getting better, it's getting easier, and that's something that we help people out with constantly all the time. But they got it down to just a science. And if you didn't do it, you were naughty. And they would put you in a room with for a deposition. Why don't you want to become an American? Because I'm Greek and I'm going home. This isn't my war. Like, screw you guys. As soon as the war is over, I'm going home. Like, that's it. They're like, okay, he's Greek, he's fine, he's not a problem, discharge him. Thank you for your service. Next. Well, my dad and my uncles are in the Austrian army and I don't feel like shooting at them. Okay, well, fair enough. Do you need an internment? You might need to be in an internment camp. Nope, don't need to be in an internment camp. Go home, go grow potatoes, but we'll put the FBI on you and the American Protective League and we'll keep eyes on you. Next person. Okay, it's because I have 5 brothers in the Serbian army and I would much rather join Serbia. Well, son, that's perfectly fine. If you want to join the Serbian army, you can join this outfit and we'll transfer you over to Serbia. Great. So they would go through this, and that paperwork actually survives. So if you guys are interested in that, let me know. Good times. So how about the production of raw materials? We don't talk about this. You guys didn't know about the spruce division. Right up there with the Camel Corps, the Spruce Division is, I love there's TT-heeing in the back from Waldorf Astoria back there. That's making me happy. No, the Spruce Division. So the Spruce Division was a group of, and actually a majority of them were lumberjacks who joined military service to harvest the Sitka spruce trees that in the Pacific Northwest. And the picture of the men who are on that's actually one of the trees. The ones that they tore down. Those are the old growth trees that are like 1 million years old. Yeah, they took those out. They built trestles, they built railways, they had trucks, they built camps, and they produced, I think it was like, what was it? It was 150 million feet of board. Now, this was processed through the U.S. Signal Corps, and those boards were then used to build planes. Now, there were companies, private companies, that were harvesting the Sitka spruce, mainly the British, the Italian, and the French, because Sitka spruce it's like old Ironsides, right? It's like, it's a thick fiber, it's light. It was sort of the new technology of the age where we're not gonna build it out of oak, we're not gonna build it out of bamboo, we're gonna build it out of the Sitka spruce because it was light, it was brilliant, and it had some sort of protection from bullets, which is great. Because if you're in a plane and all you have is what? It's a wooden body with aluminum painted canvas. You can put your hand through it, okay? With a wooden propeller, an engine, and 2 little rubber wheels. That's it. It's a model plane in the air. It is a kit plane. It's something that kid could do for a Boy Scout badge. That's what's going up in the air. And they needed Sitka spruce to make that happen. So, but this division was a specialty division, so they served, their entire service was up in the Pacific Northwest, building trestles, cutting down trees in uniform. Coolest thing ever. So if you get a chance to see more photos about the Spruce Division, I highly advocate that you do. Many of them became part of the Honorable Legion of Lumberjacks and whatever have you. But we found guys from Illinois, thanks to the thanks to the U.S. Veterans Administration Master Index cards that were released a couple months ago on Family Search. We've been finding guys who were from Chicago who served in the Spruce Division like for 4 or 5 months. So they were up there for 4 or 5 months, but they don't have any other paperwork on them because they're from Chicago. Chicago doesn't keep the best paperwork on World War I. So we'll get to that later. All right, boy soldiers. Who's heard of the boy soldiers of the UK? One kid, he's like, I'm a boy and I'm a soldier. Well, how old are you, kid? 10. You're only 2 years away from the youngest boy soldier, 12 years old. So the boy soldiers of the UK, if anybody knows about the UK marketing methods of getting men to join the war, the UK tried really hard when the war started. This is going to be a fun war, right? It's going to be like summer camp. We're going to go together, we're going to train together, we're going to get fed up, we're going to go to France, and this is going to be over by what? It's going to be over by Christmas. It's going to be over by Christmas, right? So what 12-year-old kid doesn't want to throw some underwear in a backpack and an apple and go off and join the summer camp, right? We're all going to go. You're going, I'm going, we're all going. And the UK had something called a PALS division, where you could join up with all your friends, and your relatives, or all the guys that you were from town, like all the kids from your village, like all you guys could go. Now, in the instance of our youngest soldier here, Sidney George Lewis, he was 12 years old, but to his credit, he was already 6'2". So he went up to the recruiter, and he looks 6'2", and he looks like a big guy. I mean, he was a big guy, big lad. So when he said he was 18 years old, that makes sense. With these other kids who were 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, who their sergeants really did turn a blind eye. And there was protection from the top, from the Home Office itself, to turn a blind eye to young recruits because they needed to bulk up the Army so quickly. And this ended up biting them in the butt tremendously. There was one MP who was actually absolutely fanatic about going out and finding these young men. Because once you enlisted, even though if you listed under a false name, the Army had you. You were done. So there were instances of young men who were 14 or 15 years old, young guys, just boys really, 14, 15 years old. The ones that we would have at home playing Xbox today, they're out in the trenches. and they would abandon their posts. They would run away. They would try to escape this noise. They couldn't process it. You're a kid. You're a baby, you know? And the government or the army would find them. They would court-martial them and execute them. We do not know how many of these younger boys, so the 14, 15, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds there were, because the UK lost about 60% of their World War I records in the Blitz in World War II. So we don't know. But from the advertisements, parents would tell their sons, like, we're not mad at you. You know, they would take out an advertisement and say, dear Sydney, we're not mad at you. Your mother and I are really concerned. We want to know if you're okay. Would you please write us and tell you where you are? We won't force you to come home. But in the case of Sidney George Lewis, when his mother shows up to the home office with his birth certificate, and she's a tiger mama, there's no one's going to take her 12-year-old baby away from her. The government had no choice but to bring him home because she was able to prove that he was who he said he was, he used his real name, and that he was 12 years old. Now, he did make it through the Battle of the Somme and some of the most terrible fighting in the Somme. But as soon as he got old enough to re-enlist, he did. And he went back out there and he joined the fight. But he's far from the oldest one. If anybody ever sees, has ever seen the movie, did anybody see They Shall Not Grow Old? All right, and wasn't that an amazing film? I mean, I love that film. It's always on my things to watch. But when you listen to the narration of the guys who are telling you the stories, now they're older gentlemen by the time the BBC is taking this testimony of UK veterans in the 60s and 70s. They'll tell you there was a frightening number of 16-year-olds in there. So, this was this double-edged sword. So we need men really, really badly. And you're technically, the sergeant, you don't have to join if you're under 18. There's no legal, they're not gonna say you absolutely have to join if you're not to 18. But if you're 17 years old and you look old enough, recruitment people would hound you by saying, you need to enlist, you need to enlist, you need to join. I'm 17. There's no legal obligation for me to join. You need to join. You look old enough, you should join. So it was a double-edged sword. You were being harassed and told you needed to join. But if you're underage, there were very few protections from you to face that harassment. And even if you wanted to get out, you couldn't because they would say, no, you're in the Army, you're ours now. So this was a crime, really, when I look back at it. And we look at all of the young men that they executed for, court-martialed for abandonment. But there was no recourse. Their parents had no recourse to get them home, or very little recourse to get home. And that MP who tried so hard to get them home, he lobbied for years. He eventually committed suicide because he just could not get anything through Parliament. His death did, though, motivate more people to take this up as a cause. So let's talk about broken promises in the Middle East as we're on that bummer. When we look at what's going on in the Middle East today, I always have to tip my hat and say because the World War is a big war, it takes place over multiple areas, multiple countries, multiple landscapes. A lot of what we're seeing and some of what we're seeing today is cause and consequence to what the French and the British, how they carved up the Middle East during the Great War and their secret agreements. So even though America is not initially involved in this, so we didn't have anything to do with this carving up of the Middle East. This was a gentleman's agreement between the French and the British. Eventually, this is where you get things like the Lawrence of Arabia, that he went out there and the British told him, go out there, make friends, get the Bedouins on our side, tell them whatever you need to tell them, we'll honor it. Lawrence of Arabia does that. He goes out there, he wins friends, he starts dressing, he starts learning the language, he's doing amazing things. He says, okay, the Bedouins want this portion of their land, the Arabs want this portion of their land, like this is how they want to organize. And the British said, well, we're not going to do that. We're not going to honor that. Even though we said, go out there and tell them whatever they need to hear. We already have a plan, and this is the plan. So when you keep that in mind, that there was already a plan even though nobody else knew what the plan was. Unfortunately, it just broke down the relations and the organizations and the setups of that area. Also, not to mention the fact that when we start looking at things like Turkey, and because of the Ottoman Empire and the fighting in the Ottoman Empire, that there were some villages who had no boys over 14 and no men under 60. That they're just those whole villages, there were just no men left. In some areas of Syria and Turkey, so because of the fighting in the Middle East. So it's a legacy we're still living with today, and we have to keep that in mind that this is one of the consequences of the Great War. With that in mind, I go to number 3, because I had to lighten it up a little after all that. You guys were such great, great students by sitting through that. But let's talk about the Bronzeville 370th Infantry Unit. Now, who's been on those double-decker bus tours, the ones that every tourist friend of yours comes into town and wants to go do that double-decker bus tour? My mother does that. Every single time she comes to the city, we have to bring, she brings two new friends every single time, and we have to take that hop-on, hop-bus, double-decker bus tour. My mother's from Georgia. So every time we go by Grant Park, and you know there's a giant statue of who at Grant Park? No. Well, there's that too. But who's on the top of Grant Park? There's a guy on a horse. Who is it? Grant. That's right. Every time we see Grant, my mom is from the South, so every time she sees Grant, because of her Southern sensibilities and the way that her textbooks presented him at that time, to us, he's a hero, right? He's like the hero of Galena, right? We love that guy. Like, we love going out and talking about Grant stuff. If it's not Lincoln, it's Grant. That's what I've noticed here. But to my mother, he still is like on that poop list of the South, where she looks at him and she kind of turns her head away from this. She goes, "Oh, Grant, that terrible man, what he did to us," and I'm like, "What are we talking about? We, sucker." This is why it's nice to be a child of a mixed marriage. But anyway, so let's talk about Bronzeville, because one of the places that they take you on that double-decker bus tour is that if you get a really great tour guide, and there are a lot of really great tour guides on those double-decker bus tours, they'll take you past the Victory Monument that's in Bronzeville. Now, the 370th is unique among military units that are out of Illinois. They were a cohesive unit since the Civil War, where they actually had black officers. They're the only unit to have black officers. So they had their own command. Now, this power pyramid was very empowering to the people in Chicago, and to the African Americans that were living in Chicago. So when they federalized and joined the movement, joined the war in France, their power structure and the fact that there are black officers calling the shots really, really scared the other officers and the other brass that were in the States. So Pershing did probably the smartest thing at the time period, or the thing that he could think of that would kind of allay everyone's fears, and he lent them to the French. He said, "You know what, you need some men. I've got dudes who don't speak French, who don't know your language, who have totally different uniforms, who train with totally different guns, but they're professionals. You guys will get along." But amazingly, because of the French colonies in Africa, the French and their different interpretation of inclusion, the French took them in, like, "Yep, this sounds great. Like, come over here, let's drink wine, let's talk, let's drill this way. This is what it means with this." And they joined up with some of the French units, and they did remarkably well. Were decorated and honored over time and time over again. The fact that they got a ticker tape parade when they came home, where most of the city of Chicago turned out to see them. They were a pride of Chicago. There's a wonderful documentary if anybody's interested. I met the filmmaker last year. He's a really, really wonderful guy. He did a documentary specifically for the WTTW Chicago PBS station. It was fabulous. And he went around and talked to the children who had grown up on these stories, because the 370th was just everywhere. The rest of the United States remember the Harlem Hellfighters, so that's out of New York, and that's great. But we've got our own homegrown heroes here that we should decorate more. Their armory is actually a school now, it's a high school, which is kind of cool. They just celebrated their 100th anniversary of that building, that armory building last year. But if you guys do get a chance to see the Victory Monument, I highly advocate that you do so. So next time you'll know something that maybe somebody else on the tour doesn't know, but you guys already know that because you guys are the most amazing, students here anyway. So there we go. How about the amazing number of monuments now that we get into that? That's a map. That's only part of America, all right? So this is the map. This is a map from the World War I Centennial Commission. They actually have an area where you can go onto their website. You can add information and a geographical location of monuments. There are 1,000 of them. The United States State Department actually got together, and the Secretary of War said, because of this great war, we all need to have a monument. You need a monument, you need a monument, you need a monument, you need a monument. Kind of like Oprah, but the cost is on you. So you still got to build this monument. I'm not giving you any money, but you're going to have to build a monument. So some communities, like the little community that my parents live in today, they have a plaque that's in a rock. And that's what we have. We don't have anything else. It was a poor little community, they're not going to have much. Then you have Indiana. Yeah, if there's anybody who took that to the next level, it's Indiana. Has anybody been to Indianapolis? Okay, the next time, who's been to the War Monument in Indianapolis? If you go back, if you ask for the programming director, he will give you, ahead of time, he will give you a private tour. If you ask, it's free, because I was just there. You just ask, he'll take you. He'll put you in the old-fashioned 1927 elevator that will take you upstairs past the main monument area, which is beautiful. He'll take you and he'll tell you all around it, but he'll take you up into an upper balcony area and take you outside to the outside observation deck, which is close to the public. So if you ask nicely and plan it ahead, he will do that for you for free, you and your group of people. I highly advocate that you do, because you get to see the monument from a different perspective. Right now, there's a ton of scaffolding on it. They were a recipient of one of the World War I Centennial Commission grants. And it cost, I think, like that scaffolding cost like $1 million. So they're trying to redo it. But that observation, because when you're on the observation of the World War I monument in Indianapolis, it's set up like our own national mall. You can look down in one direction and see the City Hall, and you look in the other direction and see the Arts Building. And it's just laid out just like a miniature of our own national mall. But if you ask nicely, ask ahead of time, ask for the programming director, he will give you that tour. Just line it up for him for free. It will blow the minds. And there's nothing but there's nothing but a railing between you and a bunch of really nice marble. Like, that's it. Like, it's not pretty. I found myself holding on to that and like hoping I'm gonna make it through this, but we did. It's fabulous. So if you guys get a chance, if you know of a monument, Wheaton, we know Wheaton has is it an over-the-top? Oh yeah, you have a Paulding. So there's two. There's Vescini, which is Naperville, and that is Spirit of the American Doughboy. But over the top to Victory, they look pretty similar. That deserves its whole another presentation. But what you'll see here, actually, so the Spirit of the American Doughboy and the Spirit of the American Navy, the Spirit of an American Navy, there's only 8 of these known to exist. 7 of them available to the public. That one is in Naperville. It's in Burlington Park. Does anybody know where Burlington Park is? It's where the train station is, right? It's right outside the train station. They just built some kind of hoity-toity apartment complex or something across in the park. Now there's no parking anymore. So when you're going through the Kissin Park. But I dropped my sister off at there one day and I said, oh my God, that's the Spirit of the American Doughboy. I'm gonna get over, take pictures with my phone. But there's one of only 7 of the American Navy in the United States, or in the world actually, and we have one in Naperville, which is really cool. Go check it out. But if you guys also get a chance, next time you do the Chicago architecture tour, or the open house day, go to the Elks Monument, because that started off as a World War I monument to the Elks. So now you can be a lady elk. They do take ladies now, so that's going to be very cool. One of the ladies who's in my Daughters of the American Revolution group, she works there. So if you plan ahead with them and contact them ahead of time, they'll give you a private tour as well, and that's free. So it's a great place to go. There's tons of World War I monuments. When you get a chance to see those are fabulous. Now we get back to the last part, which is why I was called in here today. Because there's a day coming up. It's an auspicious day. It is a great day, November 11th. Why is November 11th a great day? Armistice Day, that's right. Do you know the armistice only lasted 36 days, technically? 36 days. Then they had to keep extending it. It was kind of like if you didn't file your taxes on time, you get to like file an extension. So they had to keep filing an armistice over and over and over again until the Treaty of Versailles became the law of the land. But Armistice Day was Armistice Day not only here in the United States, it's still considered Armistice Day, or called Armistice Day in France and in Belgium. And the Great Britain is called Remembrance Day, but here in the United States, we changed it to Veterans Day in 1950, I should know this one, 54. So when the next time when people talk about Armistice Day or talk about Veterans Day, that really was a World War I commemoration, federal holiday of a World War I commemoration that we've extended to other veterans of other wars and in peacetime. So it's one of those things that still sticks with us. We don't think World War I has much of a legacy, but it does. And we have it in our holidays. We have it in our meatless Mondays. We have it in our ungodly amounts of technological advances. We have it in our blood. And all of these things came out of the Great War. And it sounds super strange because maybe you learned something tonight and that was the whole point. But what I love the most is when I'm up here with you guys is to see you guys nodding and smiling. And that makes me realize and makes me so happy. And I'm like, I want you all to go out and be my World War I ambassadors. And if you guys feel comfortable with that, you guys have learned some cool things tonight, maybe that you didn't know before. So I want you guys to go out there and be those advocates for that group of veterans who no longer can speak for themselves. And that's the one thing I want to carry forward. So with that, these are my recommended reads. Now, did we get handouts for these?
I have handouts.
Yes, there are handouts. So there are beautiful handouts. Woo. But this, I'm not sure if this is in the handout, but hoping it is. You guys can get your cell phones out and take a picture of this if you want to. But these are some of my recommended reads and some of my recommended watches. So, of course, I've got They Shall Not Grow Old, which is being re-released in theaters. I didn't know if you guys knew that. So they Shall Not Grow Old. If you have not got a chance to see it, it's going to be re-released next year. It's probably January and February. Watch it in 3D. Stay for the little pre-documentary that he does beforehand and stay for the documentary afterward. You do not want to miss it. I promise you, take my car keys, go. You will love it. It will be one of the best movies you see all year. I don't normally rave about these types of movies. I didn't even rave this much about Game of Thrones, and Laura remembers this. I never raved as much as I did about this movie because between the documentary and between the film itself and the documentaries, it just brings to life. Did you know that Peter Jackson is like one of the biggest collectors of like World War I memorabilia in the world? He owns like the largest collection, privately owned collection of like World War I planes in the world. Like you do. I guess that's what you do when you get Lord of the Rings money. You just start buying. He has uniforms. He has his storage spaces full of uniforms, full of artillery. You know how they got some of the sounds for that movie? He owned the artillery. They just took out into a field and recorded it. I mean, talk about a passion project, you know? But this one to the one to the far side is the Hello Girls. That was actually spearheaded by a man out of Wisconsin. And we're showing that film at my library next November. If you don't want to wait, it's out on DVD. It's fantastic. For any group or organization, you can get a site license relatively easily. If you contact him directly, he'll give you a bunch of free bracelets that say, the Hello Girls, you had me at hello. So super cute for an organization. And then I just finished reviewing The Khaki Road of Yesterday, Girls on a Line, and The Forbidden Zone for a couple other publications. But I love them. I thought they were absolutely fabulous. And for anybody who wants to get a feel of, if you have some family papers at home, gathering dust about someone's wartime experience, like a memorial, and you're not, like a memoir, and you're not sure what to do with it, oh, is it there? He cut me off, so maybe that's time for me to go. But if you have a memoir, any sort of family papers at home, and you need help getting those ready, The Khaki Road to Yesterday was just on typed onion paper in a family drawer, like in a desk drawer. And they turned it around into a book. And they did it at no cost. Because that's the magic of e-publishing these days. So they independently published and printed their book, and it's available on Amazon. So it's one of the best personal memoirs of World War I I've ever read. Because he wrote it, the author, he wrote it as a letter to his daughter who was 11, and in 1940. So he kind of saw what was going on in Europe again, and he didn't want to be redrafted and sent off to war because he had prior war experience without her having this down on paper for her in case he didn't come home or in case he was drafted and didn't come back. So he wrote, and he'll see every once in a while, he'll write, honey, I don't want you to, life is really, really difficult, and I'm talking about really hard things and really dark things, but I only want the best for you. But you're always going to have difficulties in your life. You're always going to have things you're going to have to push through. I want you to use this as a way. I want you to reassure you that you're going to get through it. So it's a fabulous memoir if you haven't read it. And then apart from that, I think that we're at questions.
Awesome,
so that was
you.
A lot.
So just to do a quick plug for They Shall Not Grow Old. Oh, yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
We do have time to take a couple of questions. Again, just the house rules for questions. Oh mine's going out now. House rules for questions is please raise your hand. Myself or Jackie will come and bring you your microphone. Please speak into the microphone so our viewers at home can hear your questions.
All right. Can I just get a raise of hands of how many people liked the program tonight? All right. How many people didn't? All right. Just make it. The one dude. He's like, yeah, that's me. I hated it. Okay, fair enough. All right. Yes,
All right,
sir.
we're going to start in the front here, Deb.
Sorry. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to say thank you for coming and enjoyed your
Oh,
presentation.
thank you. That was really sweet.
I've been to Kansas City. The
Oh, yes.
Kansas City History Museum has a lot of great maps on big walls, great maps, and you can find Contini on the map. So, I mean, it was interesting that you did this tonight, and I've been there.
Yeah. Anybody been to the World War I monument in Kansas? It's fabulous. Really, really great stuff. It's super weird because you guys know how that was funded, right? It was publicly funded. And so people from all over the United States sent their pennies and dimes in and built this monument in Kansas, because they thought it was like the center of the country, like we should have it in the center. We do not have a World War I monument in Washington, D.C., a national monument in D.C. Not yet. My guide that's online, my World War I genealogy research guide that's online, that is... I said, let's do this. Let's make this work. Because I had 3 ancestors who served in the Great War. Whoa, we are having some tech issues. Who served in the Great War. And so when they said, can we have your guide to use it, drum up interest about the Great War? I'm like, sign me up. Like, I'm at your service, sir. Let's do this. Like, we can have this. So I think they're still in the hole by like $10 million or something like that. But if you guys are interested in making a donation before the end of the year, please consider making one to the World War I National Monument in DC. I know they're really, really appreciative of any donations they get at this point, because we're going up in Pershing Park. And if anybody knows where that is, it's kitty corner to the White House. So when you have people going to and from the White House, Pershing Park, which no offense, was a dump. It was just a dump. If anybody's been there, it's a dump. It's going to look great by the time it's done. All right, so I'm sorry. Yeah, well, that's true, yes. There were no other curious questions?
Oh, I have one in the back.
Oh, perfect.
Run this way.
I'd love to see her run. I always had to be the dude in the back. It's my number 1 pupil up here, my 3 and 4 pupil here, 4 and 5. No, I'm joking. Yes, sir?
Yeah, I just learned some trivia the other day about World War I. The car that Archduke Ferdinand was riding in when he was assassinated, the license plate, the numbers on that license plate were 11, 11, 18.
That's correct. Yeah, that's also what's super creepy about that, is that they weren't even supposed to take that route. And I think that was the thing that people thought, that there was this assassin lying in wait. He was having a sandwich and honestly could not believe his luck when the Archduke's car just kind of drives by. There was a lot of things. It was one of those things where you look at it and say, it was like, you want to say it was like the finger of some sort of deity kind of coming down on that moment. You don't get those a lot, but in that instance, the 11, 11, 18, the not supposed to go that way. His wife wasn't even supposed to be with him. There's all these things that kind of go into that moment, that when it does break apart, and which was super weird. He was the guy who was trying to bring greater freedoms and greater democracy to the people, and some weirdo just took him out. It's a complicated thing, World War I. It's never just one thing, right? It's sometimes a million tiny things. But I love that piece of trivia. I'm glad that you brought that up, sir, because that's brilliant. Yes, sir. Yes. Yeah, so the question, the answer was that the car that he was in survived. That's correct. Is that in a museum now? Yeah. Do we have it? It's in Indiana. Oh, it's in that car museum in Indiana. That's right. Oh, Vienna. I thought it was in that car museum in India. Maybe they had a World War II car. Maybe that's what I was thinking about. It's in Vienna. Well, pack your bags, kids, because we're all going to Vienna. That's our next date with history, is going to Vienna to look at the car. Will they let you sit in the car? No. Well, then I'm not going now. Because if I can't go sit in the car, it's not worth it to me. Yeah, they have the bullets, too. They dug out of the car.
All right, Deb, I have our next question back here.
Yes, young sir.
What country made the second tank?
Oh, what country made the second tank? Oh, my. I just know America pumped out a lot of tanks. Do you know the answer? What?
He said France?
France? Well, then I would completely buy that, 100%. There were a lot of innovations. America certainly isn't the person who's, we're not the people making every innovation, but that makes sense that it would be France. I'm glad you knew that. That's fantastic. There any other questions?
Yep, I have one more over here.
One more.
Comment.
It's a comment. I love comments.
Yeah, yeah, she who must be obeyed decided that I need to let you know on that. Do you know who the squadron commander was for Manhard von Richthofen?
Oh, Lord, no, I don't. Not off the top.
That was Oswald Bolke,
Oh, okay.
who happened to be one of my grandmother's second cousins.
Shut up. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I don't mean shut up in a literal way.
Yeah.
I'm just like,
Yeah.
shut up. That's amazing.
Yeah, well,
Don't
no,
listen to that. Don't listen to that.
No, he introduced her to my grandfather in flying school in 1914,
Wow. That's
and
amazing.
he survived the entire war.
He did. I think, but part of it for me was I was chatting with the lovely couple that was up here earlier, and I had to get into World War I because of a diary that was found in my great-grandfather's possessions, and that diary took me to Carleton Place, Ontario, which is where Roy Brown is from. And when you go into Carleton Place, they have this giant mural of him like taking out the Red Baron and like the plane and everything. So it's still, you still find pieces of that story around and those flying aces around. I'm glad we have an amazing living piece of that right here.
Yeah, and even more amazing is that he flew two-seaters.
Oh, he flew two-seaters. Wow.
Yeah, and according to my grandmother, when he started flying the customs deal on the German-Swiss border, he would qualify as an Allied ace.
Oh, okay.
Because the aircraft that they gave for that type of deal were not really flight worthy.
No, they were not.
They were the war weary.
Yes.
And tended not to quite stay together.
No, and that brings up another thing. Like anybody, my great uncle. Thank you for that, sir. My great uncle Frank was 15 years old when he enlisted in the U.S. military, and he wanted to fly. He wanted to fly. So if you can imagine, he's an inch taller than me. I'm 5'5". I'm not wearing heels. So he's an inch taller than me, and he was 15. So we talk about Sydney earlier. He's 6'2". Now, when you look at him, he looks 15, but he wanted to fly. And he was really inspired by these flying aces. He really, really wanted to fly. So he went through flight training. It's essentially us giving a kid in a fighter jet today, a 15-year-old. But he went through flight training multiple places here in the States, in Canada, Nova Scotia, again in England, and then when he went to France. When he got to France, they didn't have enough airplanes for these guys. So they put some of the guys in the flight detachments that your job was to go out with a tractor or with a truck or like hauling equipment and get the airplanes that had come out of the air. May or may not have the bodies still in them. And they would put them on these trucks or on these carriers, take them back to a center to fix them up, and frankenbucket them back together with dreams, hopes, prayers, bubble gum, and glue because they didn't have duct tape. And that's how he spent the war. And that's how he knew just how terribly unreliable these planes were, because most of America's planes were still here in the States. So we weren't shipping them over with any huge, amount of them. So after the war, the government put them up for auction, and that's how my other Uncle Bert, bought one at auction. So, and they took them out and started crop dusting and stuff with them, which is super weird. And if you ever get a chance to fly in a World War I biplane, do it. Just do it. No, I did it. The Red Baron Squadron, Red Baron Pizza, they have a flying group. And I was a journalist at the time, and they're like, do you want to go up in a biplane? And I'm like Uncle Bert, you betcha, let's go. And if I got time for like one more story. So there's no parachute, right? No, there's no parachute. So what they do is they strap one on you, put you in the plane, and they're like, if the plane goes down, you unhook yourself here, and you stand up, and you jump out of the plane and pull this strap. And I'm like, I'm not the most coordinated person. So what happens if I can't stand up? Because I'm thinking, we're going, how are you going down, right? You're going, you're going straight down. I've seen enough Snoopy to realize that, right? So I'm like, I don't think I can stand up. Can I just unhook myself and kind of roll out? And he says, I'm not staying for you. So if that's how you want to do it, that's great. I'll see you at the bottom. And I'm like, I'm going to die. And there's pedals in the front of that. So I'm in the front, he's in the back, because he's got the flying gear. And there's still flying gear in the front. And there's pedals. He's like, under no circumstances, touch the pedals. Do not touch them. And I'm that person who, like, once you say don't touch the red button, it was the hardest flight I've ever been on. And on top of this, I have a camera, my company camera that belonged to my newspaper company, one of those giant ones. It's just on a strap around my neck. He's like, do you want to do a barrel roll? I'm like, not with it. There's no safety. There's no bar keeping you there. Like, I don't want to die. I'm making minimum wage, maybe a lower. So, but it was really cool, and it's not a smooth flight. It goes up and down with the wind. So you'll have lots of these little moments where you'll go up real fast and come down really fast. But it's wonderful, and I got some of the best shots. And I really got a feel for what Uncle Frank must have felt like, because you feel like $1 million when you're up there. It's just the wind in your hair. We had the little goggles on, but these are real. His were real, like Uncle Frank's were real glass goggles. So if you got hit in the face, you're blind, dude. Sorry, you're done. That keeps the bugs off. That doesn't really help you on an impact, if you know what I mean. But it's an amazing experience if you guys ever get a chance to fly in a biplane. And don't ever put your hand on the plane. Don't ever put your hand on the plane, because if it's canvas, it looks like it's solid, but it's canvas painted with aluminum. It'll go right through. Don't touch the plane unless they give you permission to touch the plane. Don't touch the plane. They're very picky about this. They're like people with cars. All right. So
We have one more.
Oh, we have one more?
Yeah, this is going to be our last question tonight, so Jackie's going to pass it off for our last question.
Oh, holy crap. Okay, that's great. I'm sorry.
A real fast question.
Yes.
Do you know where in Bronzeville is that monument?
Yeah, so if you're going down, if you're going down, I want to say it's Michigan Avenue. Not Lakeshore, but there's a side road that splits from Lakeshore and goes into Bronzeville. It's near the McCormick place. Mm-hmm. So it's a road that's down there, and it's super weird for me to say because I didn't grow up in Chicago. I grew up in Michigan, so I really apologize. But it's on that side road by McCormick Place, and if you go straight down there, the monument is down there. It's in the middle of traffic. Yes. There's no good way to get to it, and the best way to see it is to be on that double-decker bus tour or to risk your life by running into the median.
Which I've done.
And taking it. But if you take a walking tour of Bronzeville, and occasionally there are walking tours of Bronzeville, they will take you to that monument. It's well worth it.
It's one of my favorite World War I monuments,
It's a beautiful
too.
monument. It's fabulous. Mm-hmm. 35th and, I'm sorry? And King Drive. And yes, thank you. So it's you Google Earth it, Google Map it, and like the gentleman and the other gentleman who just knew my knowledge and the other dude who had a computer in his pocket, you can get to it pretty easily. But just be careful of parking down there. They don't have a lot of street parking, so just be careful of parking. Yes.
Awesome. So thank you so much, Deb, for coming out this evening.